Hello and welcome to the October 9th meeting of the Analytical Psychology Club. Today we will hear Greg Bogart deliver his talk, Ancient Myths and Current Passages. First, a few announcements. Please remember your Zoom etiquette and always mute your microphone until you need to speak. On November 13th, we will host Nicole Pagano and her talk, The Dante Experience, Poetry is a Vehicle for Peace. And now allow me to move on to today's event and to introduce our speaker. Greg Bogart has been a frequent speaker at the Analytical Psychology Club, and we are thrilled to have him back. Greg Bogart has made significant contributions to the fields of transpersonal, humanistic astrology, and to Jungian psychotherapy. His research on the efficacy of Jungian dream work in the treatment of depression is documented in his books, Dream Work and Self-Healing, and Dream Work in Holistic Psychotherapy of Depression. Greg has authored at least 9 books on psychology, spirituality, and astrology. Currently, he is a lecturer at Sonoma State University, where he teaches courses on depth psychology, Jungian dream work, mythology, and the psychology of yoga. Greg is a licensed psychotherapist and a certified astrological counselor who practices in the East Bay. Please give a warm welcome to Greg Bogart.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you all for coming. I thank the Analytical Psychology Club for inviting me to be here. And over the years, we've had some great conversations about the use of dream interpretation, the use of astrology. So we've talked about astrological symbols here, and we've talked about dream analysis. But today I'm going to do something a little different and consider the messages of myth. And during confusing times of world crisis, we can turn to mythology for entertainment, guidance, and an expansive array of archetypal characters to contemplate. I hope you will find that the recitation of myths is revitalizing and emotionally evocative, like discussing a shared collective dream. And the stories are often seriously funny. Now, in our first hour, we're going to just tour briefly some major themes in myth. We'll talk about the Babylonian creation myth, Egyptian Osiris myth, a few short tales from the Mahabharata and Ramayana epics of India, which portray drama around kingship and coronation. And this first part of my talk will go a little more than an hour, and it will be followed by a 10-minute break, during which time I encourage you to just take a moment to contemplate the stories, maybe write a few words or sentences in your notebook, and just sit with whatever is stirred in you by hearing the stories. All of that will prepare us for the second half of my talk today, which will present the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the first written story known to humanity. And it's the story of a terrible, tyrannical king who goes through all kinds of changes. You'll then spend another 10 minutes on a break, but also hopefully contemplating the stories, whatever it brings up for you. And that will leave our remaining time for discussion and declarations. Now, in keeping with Saturn's current transit in Aquarius, squaring Uranus, I'm intending this to be a participatory event. So, writers including Jung, Joseph Campbell, Stanley Krippner, Rollo May, Mircea Eliade and Phil Cousineau, Stephen Larson, and Mircea Eliade, they have all discussed the importance of developing a personal mythology. And Joseph Campbell taught that myths explain the workings of the natural world. They assist our transitions through different stages of life. They help us find meaning in our work, our social position, and they reveal mysteries of the universe. They give us a cosmic perspective. And Campbell taught that myth is inexhaustible and that we should try to make mythic stories our own and breathe some new life into them. Now, Stephen Larson, who was Joseph Campbell's biographer, recommends that to discover mythic roots, we engage in an archaeology of spirit, digging for mythic themes in our own dreams, but also in collective mythology. And through this personal myth-making, we participate in timeless dramas. Now, Mircea Eliade, the historian of religions, wrote, "Myth narrates a sacred history, that is, a transhuman revelation which took place at the dawn of the great time, in the holy time of beginnings, in illo tempore. Being real and sacred, myth becomes exemplary and consequently repeatable, for it serves as a model and justification for all human actions. In other words, a myth is a true history of what came to pass at the beginning of time, and one which provides the pattern for human behavior. In imitating the exemplary acts of a god or a mythic hero, or simply recounting their adventures, the man of an archaic society detaches himself or herself from profane time and magically re-enters the great time. And for Eliade, the mere recitation of a myth causes an eruption of the sacred. So, trusting that this is the case, we're going to return to the time of human origins and embark on a lighthearted recital of a few ancient myths to invite a new eruption of the sacred, to gain new perspectives for the pressing needs of our time, to discover models for our own human actions at this turning point in history. We re-enter the great time in preparation for our own acts of destiny. So we're going to drop a taproot briefly into the ancient past to find orientation during a time of social unrest, public health crisis, fierce climate changes, symbolized astrologically by the stormy Saturn-Uranus square. So today we're entering a labyrinth of archaic images and stories. I misplaced my labyrinth. We're entering a labyrinth of stories in search of timeless truths that resonate. But it's the nature of a labyrinth that at first you feel disoriented. You have to trust and feel your way to the center without being able to see exactly where you're going. So, myth means speech, word, and talk. For Homer and the Greek tragedians, myth refers to tale, story, or narrative. So myths are stories that tell us about reality and stories whose purpose isn't limited to entertainment. For Northrop Frye, myths are stories charged with a special seriousness and importance. Many people view myths as false stories that primitive people used to explain the universe before we had a better scientific explanation for the world around us. Others view myths as allegories that express meanings figuratively, or rewritten histories that deify exceptional human beings. But the German philosopher Friedrich Schelling rejected attempts to impose on myth a secondary meaning. He believed myth has to be understood on its own terms as an autonomous expression of the human spirit with its own mode of reality content that can't be directly translated into rational terms without a great loss of meaning. So the insights obtained from myths are multiple, are varied. We get historical insights. So some verifiable events are reflected in mythological stories. We get anthropological insights. Myths depict a culture, the values of a society. They are metaphysical, revealing what it means to be human, typical characteristics and limitations of humans. Myths are cosmological, describing the universe as understood by the best science or knowledge available at the time. They're etiological. They explain the cause of a social custom or a fact of the universe. They are sociological. They explain the origin of groups that people belong to or that we participate in. Myths are psychological. They reveal the struggle of individuals to become mature human beings and useful members of our society. Ultimately, myths are imaginative attempts to understand life's mysteries. Claude Lévi-Strauss views myths as narratives that aim to resolve the contradictions in human experience, binary oppositions, such as the one and the many, youth and age, wet and dry, male and female, human and animal, culture and nature, and life and death. These oppositions or contradictions are brought together in mythology. Eliade also wrote, myths narrate not only the origin of the world, animals and plants and of humans, but also all the primordial events in consequence of which man became what he or she is today, mortal, sexed, organized in a society, obliged to work in order to live, working in accordance with rules. For archaic people, myth is a matter of primary importance. Myth teaches the primordial stories that constitute us existentially. The person of archaic societies is not only obliged to remember mythical history, but also to reenact part of it periodically. By recollecting the myths, by reenacting them, he or she is able to repeat what the gods, the heroes, or the ancestors did at the beginning. And life cannot be repaired for archaic societies. It can only be recreated by a return to source. The source of sources is the outpouring of energy, life, and fecundity that occurred at the creation of the world. So, for example, according to the Polynesian creation myth, in the beginning, there were only the waters and darkness. Io, the supreme God, separated the waters by the power of thought and of his words, and created the sky and earth. He said, "Let the waters be separated, let the heavens be formed, let the earth be." These cosmogonic words, by virtue of which the world came into existence, these are creative words, charged with creative power. Hence, humans utter them whenever there is something to do, something to create. The words by which Io caused light to shine in the darkness are used in rituals for cheering a gloomy and despondent heart, for shedding light into secret places and matters. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this today, because I feel like we all could use some cheering up. So to cheer our gloomy and despondent hearts, we are going to remember these creative words of origins. So as this story suggests, some of the great themes of myth include creation. Creation is one of the central themes of myth, how the world came to be out of total emptiness or void, out of a limitless expanse of water or darkness, or a primal egg containing the potentials of everything. Creation myths describe the formation of the world in a series of stages. Some myths emphasize the loss of early perfection or paradise. Myths sometimes describe the creation of human beings by a creator god or gods. And some stories describe the descent or devolution of humans from an earlier state, as in Hesiod's Work and Days, which depicts humanity's decline from a better golden age. In reciting creation myths, we restore our connection to the source of all life and existence. So, for example, the Omaha Indian creation myth begins, at the beginning, all things were in the mind of Wakanda. All creatures, including man, were spirits. They moved about in space between the earth and the stars. Now, if we were spirits then we are spirits now, moving in the space between the earth and stars, discovering who we really are, who we are in the mind of Wakanda, the creator. In Chinese mythology, Pangu, the primal deity, the offspring of yin and yang, the primal forces of the universe, Pangu came into being in a huge primordial egg and grew for 18,000 years until the egg split open. Now, note the long gestation of the deity. Before anything can be born or created, it must undergo a period of formative silence, the time before the beginning, when everything is possible. Myths also depict cosmic disasters, the end of the world, a great flood. We're going to see this cosmic deluge, kind of reminiscent of the deluge we just had in Florida a week ago, a great flood. Myths represent destruction as punishment sent by the gods to human beings who might be guilty of some sin, like not neglecting to worship the gods. Later, we're going to see in the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, the god Apsu and goddess Tiamat decide to send a great flood to destroy humanity because human beings are too noisy and unruly. That's why they decided to send the cosmic flood. So we're going to see myths feature cyclical worlds, creative order versus destructive chaos. Worlds are created and dissolved. Myths reveal cosmic architecture, the separation of the visible and invisible worlds, the division of the four directions. They describe earth and heaven and the underworld. Supernatural beings, such as gods and spirits, and demons and serpents, are the principal actors in the drama of cosmic action. There is also heroes and tricksters in a lot of myths. So heroes such as Prometheus, Perseus, Odysseus, and others perform extraordinary feats, laying the foundation of human society. Theft of fire is a key event in development of human consciousness, and it's portrayed in the Prometheus myth, obviously. For Pacific Northwest Indian tribes, Raven is the discoverer of fire. He's a trickster who outwits the enemies of humanity. So the trickster is a creative, subversive, mischievous, cunning, and humorous character. And so we'll meet tricksters in this mythic journey. Another central symbol is the central pillar or central axis uniting the three worlds, constituting the world tree or the tree of life. And this is a depiction by the Florida artist Patricia Bowers, beautiful tree of life. So we'll see that image also. And most importantly, myths offer explanations for the origins of death and the causes of disease or misfortune. So myths depict spirit and the afterlife, body and soul, and the soul's journey after death. So the classic example of this is the Egyptian Osiris myth. Now here you see Nut, the goddess of the sky, and Geb, the earth god, down at the bottom. And so they gave birth to Osiris, and Osiris was the first king and the god of fertility and agriculture. And his people loved him. He was like JFK, the handsome young king with his beautiful young wife, Isis. Osiris was murdered by his brother Seth, who envied his brother's power and popularity. But Seth was angry for another reason, which was that Osiris accidentally slept with Seth's wife, Nephthys, and got her pregnant, and the child became Anubis. So the family situation immediately is like a soap opera. We've got a complex family here, and we may wonder, how is it possible to accidentally sleep with the wrong person? I guess it still happens. I hear stories all the time. So anyway, violent quarrels break out between the brothers, and Seth schemes with some co-conspirators to trick Osiris. They have a little party and they build a coffin, basically, and it's a nicely carved wooden box, and they say, hey, whoever fits in this box, they can have it. Wow, it's like Cinderella with the glass slipper. So Osiris took his turn. He steps into the coffin, and they immediately slammed shut the lid and sealed it with molten lead and sent it down the river. They sent it into the Nile, and it floated downstream until it came ashore and rested under a tamarisk tree. Basically, Seth arranged a mob hit on his brother Osiris and made the body disappear down the river. So time passed, and the tamarisk tree grew around the coffin with Osiris's body sealed inside. And sometime later, the tree was cut down by the local king, and it emitted a delicious fragrance from the tamarisk tree. So it became renowned. People were talking about this. So meanwhile, Isis is searching everywhere for Osiris. Where did he go? She's inconsolable, grieving, uttering sad laments. She's having, complicated bereavement. She's really suffering from his disappearance. Her copious tears caused the Nile to flood. So Isis is the mourning goddess who represents our loving remembrance of our departed friends, our departed family members, trying to keep their spiritual essence alive. And Isis never gave up her search for her lost beloved. She went everywhere to the ends of the earth. Emma Jung was a little bit like Isis, standing by her man, even though he was off with another woman. But anyway, hearing of the fragrant tree, Isis located the coffin. She sort of suspected maybe there was some connection here. So she opened the lid of the coffin and turned into a bird, a kite, a hawk, maybe a sparrow. and its flapping wings forced the breath back into Osiris's body. She flapped her wings, and suddenly Osiris has a little breath in him. The kite lay down on top of his phallus, and they conceived their son, Horus. She roused him long enough to conceive their son. So the myth implies that if we're fully committed, we can breathe new life into our loved ones. So now Isis places Osiris's body back in his tomb, and Seth is enraged. So he learns of this, and he goes and he cuts up Osiris's remains into 14 pieces, scattering them all over Egypt. So we have a kind of shamanic image of dismemberment here. He's torn into pieces, but Isis painstakingly goes and collects all the pieces, and she buries them in different places in Egypt, which become the sites of Osiris's temples. The dismemberment of Osiris was compared with the annual cutting down and threshing of wheat and barley crops. And Osiris was thought to rise again with the growth of new crops. This cycle of vegetation exemplifies the archetype of death and rebirth. Now, fully and irreversibly dead, Osiris becomes the ruler of the underworld. And he guaranteed every deceased Egyptian the opportunity to attain eternal existence. Murdered by his brother, he returns to life as ruler of the dead. This Osiris myth describes passage into life after death and the soul's journey and judgment in the underworld. So reaching the throne realm of Osiris, a deceased person had to declare innocence of various crimes before the 42 judges of the underworld. The heart, on the left here, the heart or the conscience was weighed on a pair of scales against the feather of truth, the feather of the goddess Mot. She's the goddess of truth and justice. So the soul was judged in balance with the feather of truth and justice. And a female monster squatted by the scales, ready to devour the deceased if the heart weighed more than the feather, if the soul and the sum of the person's actions weren't in balance with this feather of truth. Those who passed this test were judged pure and became spirits who moved among the gods. And Thoth, I don't know if I have Thoth here. Thoth, the scribe and record keeper, was an aid to the deceased and helping judge to determine if the person was righteous and innocent of all wrongdoing. But basically, knowing we may one day have to answer for the full course of our actions in the court of Thoth and Osiris gives us pause to consider each act thoughtfully. So, from our earliest origins, mythology expresses our human need to come to terms with death. Joseph Campbell taught that the earliest mythology of humans appears in the Paleolithic bear cult, evident at sites where bones of cave bears were ceremonially buried or displayed, suggesting that they were doing some ritual of thanking the bear or asking the bear to return, affirming a covenant with the animal that was believed to willingly offer itself to be hunted and eaten. So animals play a key role in myths. Animals, plants, great birds, serpents. Many myths depict a kinship between animals and humans. Animals have equal status to humans, sometimes portrayed as the creation of human beings, or myths described transformation of humans into animals. Animals were the subject of the earliest cave paintings, such as these images that I'll be showing you from the Lascaux caves. I'll get to those pictures in a moment. And you see here a figure of an animal shaman from the Les Trois Frères in France, the three brothers. Apparently, three brothers fell down a hole into a cave and discovered the wonderful cave. So according to Joseph Campbell, the earliest mythological themes concern the relationship of humans to the animals that at that time they must hunt and eat to survive. So some of the earliest human artifacts uncovered by archaeologists from 30 to 40,000 years ago are spears or carved spear throwers, hand tools made of stone, flat stones inscribed with images and scratched lines. I'll show you that here. This is the oldest known art, 77,000 years old, where this piece of rock was engraved with these lines. That's the first writing of some kind. So these are the first human tools. They made batons made out of long bones, mammoth ivory, ember, and antlers. So we know that tens of thousands of years ago, our Paleolithic ancestors hunted animals and made tools out of stone and used them for cutting meat, scraping bones, and preparing skins. They constructed shelters, carved decorative objects, they sparked fire and used it deliberately, and they studied and venerated animals. They were hunters, builders, and artisans. They practiced body adornment with paint, shells, and animal teeth to mark the drama of socialization and life transitions as people moved through different stages, adolescence to adulthood, from unmarried to married, from childbearing to post-childbearing. And they also marked the passage into death through body adornment in burial. And according to paleontologists, roughly 45 to 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, having lived side by side with Neanderthals for thousands of years, experienced what's known as the Upper Paleolithic Revolution and the creative explosion when art appeared and human life became recognizable. And in the book, The Mind in the Cave by David Lewis Williams, he explains how the creation of art played a key role in the transition to fully human consciousness. So, our ancestors throughout Western Europe and Africa drew paintings and made carvings of animals and human figures on the walls of hidden caves. Look at these hyenas. These paintings of horses, rhinos, bison, here's cave bears, lions. These were not simply decorative objects to brighten up their drab living spaces. They were symbolic and expressive of shared meanings. Now, interpreted by some as totemistic images used for sympathetic magic. We'll get to that one soon. Interpreted by some as totemistic images used to give hunters power over their prey. Others believe these images were a way to acquire the strength of dangerous predators. Now, some light on their meaning. I'm going to come back to this picture soon. Some light has been shed by structuralist theorists who contend that meaning consists not so much in things themselves as in the relationships between things. So we can look at symbols as expressions of binary themes and oppositions. In his book, The Art of Prehistoric Man in Western Europe, André Leroy Gourhan speculates that an image of a delicate horse confronting a large bison could be read as a conflict between feminine tenderness and masculine bulk. And he looked at the array of animals on cave walls, looked at all these animals, and he divides them into 4 groups. So group A is the small herbivores like the horse, stag, reindeer. Group B is the large herbivores like the bison and the aurochs, wild cattle. Group C was peripheral species like the mammoth and the deer. And then group D was the dangerous animals. Now look at this, on this one, you see that little mark on this bull's flank there. And so in this illustration, he shows how certain marks indicated what he felt was the gender of the animals, that certain marks and certain animals were given female or male characteristics. And it was also evident that our ancestors were keen observers and were able to discern it was the group D animals that were dangerous. So whereas Neanderthal hunting had been largely haphazard, for Homo sapiens, hunting became a highly organized social activity. And you can see this picture shows a spear has just pierced the bison. We'll be talking more about this image because it's so interesting. But our ancestors observed animals and their behavior, relationships between different animals, strategies to avoid them and hunt them. And all of that required anticipation, calculation, and imagination. These prehistoric animal paintings were found in difficult to access caves, designed in sections apparently as a location for initiation rites. It's believed that cave paintings were placed so that young initiates would experience a charged initial encounter with animals they'd later risk their lives to hunt. When hunting was the primary means of survival, preparation for this terrifying encounter with wild forces became the central theme of myth. And Karen Armstrong wrote that Paleolithic myth was characterized by reverence for the animals that humans now felt compelled to kill. To kill an animal is to kill a friend. So tribesmen often feel guilt after a successful expedition. Faced with this potentially intolerable dilemma, they created myths and rituals that enabled them to come to terms with the murder of their fellow creatures. So the extraordinary underground caverns at Altamira and Lascaux give us a tantalizing glimpse of Paleolithic spirituality. The numinous paintings of deer, bison, and woolly ponies, of shamans disguised as animals, hunters with their spears. These were painted with exquisite care in deep subterranean caverns, extremely difficult of access. These grottos were probably the first temples and cathedrals. This is still Karen Armstrong. They set the scene for a profound meeting between humans and the godlike animals that adorn the cavern walls. There was probably music, dancing, and singing in the caves. A journey to another world began with a descent into the depths of the earth. There was communion with animals in a magical dimension. It is likely the caves were used in initiation rites that transformed young men into hunters. It was from the experience of the shaman and the hunt that the myth of the hero was born. The hunter, the shaman, the neophyte all turn their backs on the familiar and endure fearsome trials. They all face the prospect of death before returning with gifts to nourish the community. All cultures have developed a mythology about the heroic quest. The hero feels there's something missing in their life or their society. So they leave home, endure death-defying adventures. They fight monsters, climb inaccessible mountains, traverse dark forests. They die to their old self and gain a new insight, which they bring back to their people. So every one of us at some time or another has to be the hero who goes on this great quest. Perhaps the most evocative of all the Paleolithic cave paintings is this one from Lascaux, France. I'm just showing you several different photographic images of the same painting. It depicts a bison pierced by an arrow, and then nearby a human figure he's next to a bird head staff, leaning back in what appears to be a trance state or a state of awe. The image suggests the ability to perceive or conceive of a realm beyond this present visible world, possibly the place to which the soul returns at death. The image shows the ability to conceptualize a spiritual realm and to prepare for that realm. Here and now, we too can imagine a spiritual realm and feel that we're already a part of it. So according to David Lewis Williams, this cave painting at Lascaux suggests that early humans were able to remember and entertain mental imagery derived from a variety of states of consciousness, from introverted states, from dreaming, from altered states, and then to manipulate and share that imagery and conceive of an alternative reality, a parallel state of being or spirit world, so memorable and emotionally charged, it had a factuality and life of its own. They could entertain mental images, generate them, and recognize a connection between images and 2 or 3 dimensional images. And they could discuss these images with other people. This capacity to symbolize, imagine, and communicate marked the divergence of Homo sapien consciousness from that of the Neanderthals. According to cultural historian William Irwin Thompson, this Lascaux cave art was a vehicle for storytelling by hunters. In one interpretation, it shows a hunter who has struck his spear into the bison. You see the entrails spilling out. And the one interpretation, the hunter has been gored to death in retaliation. And I remember Joseph Campbell saying he thought that interpretation was ridiculous in one of his lectures. But it could portray a power vision of a shaman in trance. The presence of the bird staff and the man's state of arousal, shown by his erection, indicate he has entered a state of ecstasy and vision. He is struck by the power of the numinous, that unnameable power that floods us in moments of illumination. The bird staff is suggestive of the Kundalini rising, like a tree rising towards the sun, flooding the brain. The bird head on the man indicates he is one whose consciousness can fly into the sky. This is a shaman. This is no ordinary person. He's in another dimension. Now, recently, I learned that this bird-headed image from Lascaux is also a symbol of a primordial mythology of the goddess, the great mother. Marija Gambutas showed that the iconography of the bird-snake complex, look again at the image, here's the bird-snake, that this image goes back to the 6th millennium BCE in Central Europe. She said the snake and bird goddess was a predominant image in the pantheon of Old Europe. As a combined snake and water bird with a long phallic neck, she was inherited from the Magdalenian culture of the Upper Paleolithic. Though usually portrayed as a hybrid, this divinity could also be a separate snake goddess. She is the feminine principle. Now, I'm going to say more about this in a moment after sketching a huge historical transition in just a few brief sentences. So just see if you can follow this. After the Ice Age, the Pleistocene era ended 11,700 years ago. Climates shifted and trees began to grow where before great herds of reindeer, horse, and bison had roamed the open tundra of Europe. The tundra now turned more to forests, and the herds retreated from Western Europe. Species like short-faced bears, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and most mammoths became extinct at the end of the Ice Age. So after melting of the ice, the bow and arrow were used to pursue animals. Humans started marking the phases of the moon and observed nature and constructed a calendar. During the transitional period of culture known as the Mesolithic, hunting parties started to range out from greater distances from home base. The hunting and fishing camp became a place with a longer life, and a male subculture emerged with its own rituals and stories. Meanwhile, women and children were starting to bring in more food than men by gathering crops. So men were starting to range out for longer periods to hunt, so they would bring something home. And according to William Irwin Thompson, greater grew the distance between the subculture of the males and the traditional culture of females in the religion of the great goddess, who was patroness of the hunt, mistress of the animals, source of all life, and she was often portrayed with a long phallic neck. And I'll show you some images momentarily. So, where the Paleolithic cave art exhibited the emerging human faculty of symbolization, portraying our world in pictures, during the Mesolithic stage of culture, domestication of animals was a pivotal advance. Domestication of canines was occurring perhaps as early as 15,000 BCE. And during this Mesolithic time, there was domestication of cats, aurochs, wild cattle, boar, sheep, goats, horses, and donkeys. These were all domesticated for both practical and religious purposes. They were a food source. They were work animals and so forth. So subsequently, the Neolithic period was the time of agriculturalization. So we've got symbolization, domestication of animals, now agriculturalization, the development of farming as a means of survival. So we humans began working consciously with natural forces. Where is the image I'm looking for? And we began by observing cycles of nature. And this is shown in this fascinating figurine, which is known as the Venus of Losel, which depicts a woman touching her stomach with one hand. And in the other hand, she's holding a bison horn shaped like a crescent moon, marked with 13 lines. The 13 lines could refer to the 13 lunar months in a year, or 13 days between menstruation and ovulation. The image clearly represents an awareness that women's bodies, their fertility and childbearing, were linked to the phases of the moon. William Irwin Thompson writes, women were the first observers of the basic periodicity of nature, the periodicity upon which all later scientific observations were made. We can trace the birth of astrology to this discovery of the cyclical nature of time, nature, and the body. So Neolithic culture from roughly 8,000 to 6,000 BCE saw the growth of crafts, the transformation of gathering into gardening, the birth of agriculture. And let's see, I'm a little bit out of order here. So according to Marija Gombutas, the Kurgan culture of Proto-Indo-Europeans, the Kurgan culture of Proto-Indo-Europeans, a semi-nomadic militaristic group of peoples originating in the steppes of Russia, probably in what is now Ukraine, rode on horseback as they came into contact with old Europeans, migrating in waves into the geographic areas that became Greece, Italy, Britain, Ireland, Lithuania, Latvia, Russia, Germany, Scandinavia, Anatolia, India, Iran, and Chinese Turkestan. So this Kurgan hypothesis is now the most widely accepted proposal to identify the Proto-Indo-European homeland from which Indo-European languages spread. And this was said to occur between 4,400 and 2,800 BCE. This is just another picture of the same theory. It's called the Kurgan hypothesis. And so in the spread of this Kurgan culture, they encountered and either conquered or assimilated groups of indigenous peoples who were relatively peaceful, agrarian, artistically creative, probably equalitarian in social structure, and goddess worshiping, according to Marija Gombutas. These people built two-story houses. And here's Çatalhöyük, which I'll be talking about. They built two-story houses, temples, and they produced ceramics in great quantity. Indo-European language and culture resulted from the merging of the languages and cultures of these two groups, the Kurgans that were spreading in many directions, and the old Europeans. In the culture of old Europe, the full cycle of birth, death, and rebirth was worshipped in the form of a great goddess. The goddess, she says, my quotations are all out of order. I don't know why. The goddess was one and many. The hybrid bird and snake goddess was the great goddess of the life continuum. She was the creator and the destroyer, the crone and the goddess in the prime of life. So in old Europe, tombs featured statues of the goddess and pottery with regenerative designs. Neolithic temples and house shrines featured a central hearth containing altars, statues, human and animal-shaped vases, incense burners, as well as domed ovens, grinding stones, storage jars, and looms. So we know our Neolithic ancestors wove cloth, they baked bread, and they created pottery. And there's thousands of these figures, these statues, these ceramic pieces that have been discovered. She writes, Gimbutas writes, in Neolithic Europe and Asia Minor, in the era between 7,000 and 3,000 BCE, religion focused on the wheel of life and its cyclical turning. This is the geographic sphere and the time frame I refer to as Old Europe. Here, the focus of religion encompassed birth, nurturing, growth, death, and regeneration, as well as crop cultivation and the raising of animals. So the people of this era pondered natural forces as well as wild plant and animal cycles, and they worshiped goddesses or a goddess in many forms. The images of the goddess can be loosely characterized under her aspects of life-giving and sustaining, death and renewal. When the old Europeans discovered how to fire pottery in the 7th millennium BCE, that pottery provided a new way to express religious ideals. A variety of forms displayed the spiritual symbols of old Europe. So again, these small figures etched with sacred symbols, geometric designs, these all may have been some kind of a script. They were used to enact rituals, and they were found in sites all over Italy, the Balkans, and Central Europe, Asia Minor, which is modern Turkey, in the Near East, and in parts of Western and Northern Europe. And she says this complex art around the goddess is a shifting kaleidoscope of meaning. She was the creator from whom all life arose, to whom everything returned. Now, again, these carved images and statues of goddess figures and her animal allies coincides with the growth of agriculture during the Neolithic Revolution, where farming became a central occupation. And so Paleolithic culture showed reflection on the mystery of death. And this, in the Neolithic time, the central mystery was discovery how a seed descends into the depths of the earth and then breaks open into new life. So the crop was an epiphany, a revelation of divine energy. I could go on and on about this, but contemplating this Neolithic consciousness and the goddess reminds me of the importance of our own settlements and domestic compounds, the importance of occupying ourselves with our personal crafts and industrious activities, and striving for attunement with cycles of nature, growing food, caring for animals, enhancing our habitats, maybe even reducing material consumption. So in our own way, trying to return to the mother of all existence, honoring Earth's bounty. Now, this nurturing Earth became the mother goddess of various religions, various cultures and world mythologies. And in Assyria, the goddess was called Asherah. In Sumer, in Mesopotamia, she became Inanna or Ishtar. The Greeks called her Demeter, the goddess of nature, vegetation, and food crops. And I thought I should just mention the first goddess myth. So we have these images of the goddess from Neolithic times, but we have no stories. There's no myth. We can only infer the meaning. But the very first story of the goddess was the story of Inanna, the goddess Inanna. And Inanna was portrayed as a very militaristic kind of goddess. She was powerful. She was into taking over other people's terrains. So she was sort of ambitious, you might say. And I guess a few of the relevant facts are she got a lot of powers. She got the god of wisdom. His name was Enki. She got Enki drunk. They had a little drinking competition. And so Enki passed out. And so she took all of his powers. These were the powers of civilization, different powers like justice, kingship, or different things. And so she acquired all these powers. And then she thought, well, I want to take over the underworld. So the underworld was ruled by her big sister, whose name was Ereshkigal. So Inanna got herself dressed up to the nines to go into the underworld. She put on her best gown, her robes. She had on a beautiful sash. She had on mascara, and she put on a wig, and she had a lapis lazuli necklace. She had all kinds of precious jewels and her best shoes. And she put on lipstick. She was just dressed like to go to a big business meeting or something. But anyway, she wants to get admitted into the underworld so she can try and do, I guess, like a hostile takeover. So she goes to the gates of the underworld and knocks on the gates. And the gatekeepers, what do you want? What are you doing here? And so Inanna kind of disingenuously says, oh, I want to attend the funeral of my sister's husband. That's why I've come. So the gatekeeper is a little suspicious. So he goes down and talks to Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, and tells her, your little sister's here, and she's all dressed up, all fancy, and not really dressed for the underworld. So Ereshkigal says, lock the gates, lock all the 7 gates of the underworld, and then you can admit her, but make her strip down at each gate. So the gatekeeper goes back and says, all right, so the first thing is I'm going to take your lapis lazuli measuring rod, and then I'll let you in the first gate. And that's just the way it is in the underworld. And so at each subsequent gate, she has to strip off some of her garments. So she has to give up her wig, she has to give up her lapis lazuli necklace and her shawl and her beautiful gown until she's stripped naked in front of her sister, Ereshkigal. And some of you have read the wonderful book by Sylvia Pereira called Descent to the Goddess, where she says this is an initiation. We have to face the darkness. We have to come to terms with, the harsh side of life, death and loss and bereavement. All of us may go through different stages where we have to strip down our personas, our carefully presented personas, and get down to a place of nakedness. Edward Edinger calls this the state of psychological honesty. We have to get to a place where we're just without guile and without pretense, without artifice, where we're in the naked truth of ourselves. So that symbolism of stripping down is evocative. So then Inanna is standing there, she's at the mercy of the judges of the underworld. They're called the Gala demons. And so they look at her, they give her the evil eye. They look at her with the eye of death and the eye of anger. And that's it. She's dead. So she's in the underworld, and 3 days pass. Before she went down there, she told her personal assistant, whose name was Ninshubur, she said, if I don't come back in 3 days, go to the temples of 4 gods and ask them for help. So Ninshubur goes to the temples of 4 gods to say, we need help to get her back. And the first 3 say, it's her own fault. She brought this on herself by going down there and knocking on the gate. It's her own problem. So we're not going to help. But Enki, the guy who she had stolen the powers from, he had actually forgiven her and said a blessing to her when she departed. It's like a mentor or teacher. You give your knowledge, and then the student goes off and they become, they do something fantastic with it. But a good teacher, a good mentor is happy that you go beyond them. They say, fine, great. They give a blessing. So Enki wasn't resentful, even though she had stolen all his powers. And Enki said, all right, I'm going to help. So Enki sends 2 sexless beings down into the underworld, and they're supposed to go down to Ereshkigal and basically cajole her and do whatever they can and try and get the body of Inanna back. So they go down there, and Ereshkigal, says, all right, what are you guys doing down here? What do you want? And they say, we'd like the body of Inanna, please. And so I'm going to tell you what goes next in a moment. This is this goddess Inanna, by the way. She was very popular in Uruk, the city where the Gilgamesh epic takes place. So here they are making offerings to Inanna. And what I wanted to say before continuing the story is she had a husband. This husband was named Dumuzi or Dumuzid, depending on the translation. And they were like the first celebrity couple. They were like the Brad and Angelina of their time. There were many, many poems describing their love and their love encounters, their hookups. So they were like a famous power couple at the time. So anyway, Inanna's down in the underworld, and here she is with her powers, possessing her powers. But Ereshkigal says, well, look, I could let you go, but somebody needs to come down here to take your place. So Inanna says, okay. So Ereshkigal says, how about if I take Ninshubur, your personal assistant, your secretary? And Inanna says, no, you cannot take her. She is too valuable, and she has been mourning and grieving for me while I've been down in the underworld. So no. So next, Ereshkigal says, well, what about your beautician? So she wants to take Inanna's hairdresser. Inanna says, no, you can't take him. He's too important. And he also has been mourning and grieving and lamenting my absence. So no, he's off limits. So who's left? Well, back up on Earth, Dumuzi wasn't grieving, wasn't mourning. He was sitting on Inanna's throne and was surrounded by slinky-looking young women. And Inanna saw this. She said, take him. So she abandons her husband, gives him up, and the Gala demons take Dumuzi into the underworld. And that's the end of him. So, so that's a little taste of the story of Inanna and Dumuzi and her journey into the underworld, which I repeat is the very first goddess myth. That is the first myth of the goddess known, at least as far as I know. Now, I am going on, and I'm a long way from home here. So with Neolithic culture, agriculture, we start having economic surplus, expanded trade activity. Humans start staying in stable settlements instead of roaming around hunting. So they start staying in one place from generation to generation, remaining close to their settlements, close to their fields, their animals. So this brings in the beginning of urbanization, the next revolution in culture. But this accumulation of wealth of farmers started inviting raiders, invasions of people like the Kurgans. That's the dynamic here. So historically, we start seeing a shift from the culture of women, the goddess religion, to a culture dominated more by masculine military power and a military class. William Irwin Thompson calls it the end of the Great Mother and the beginning of the era of the Father. And we're going to see this transition. It's huge in the mythology of the ancient Near East. So this city, Çatalhöyük, now in Turkey, in Anatolia, it was a ceremonial center devoted to the old religion of the Great Mother. In this city, metallurgy was evident. Copper and lead were smelted and shaped. They had wooden vessels and woolen textiles. But they also had fortress walls, an architecture of defense, and the sling as a means of delivering projectiles. And apparently around 5400 BCE, the period of Çatalhöyük's greatness ended with a period of warfare, which I won't go into in detail, but there was a great invasion, a lot of military activity, and this militarism became more a feature of the way of life. And so fortress settlements start evolving into walled cities. And this shows you where Çatalhöyük is in relation to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers of Mesopotamia, which is where we're going next. So writing starts to appear alongside irrigation farming, development of the plow, dikes, canals, storehouses, record keeping, and military societal organization. So this is the beginning of civilization as we know it, most notably in Sumer, where archaeologists say history begins. And so the Sumerians had mastered irrigation, and this brought advances in agriculture. So in this area of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumerians, Akkadians, and then later Assyrian tribes conquered the region in waves and bequeathed us the origins of our way of life. So Sumerian society was organized around the city-state. They had the popular religion was animistic. So there were all these mysterious forces of nature. People would use spells to avert demons. Astronomers watched the heavens. They used omens to divine the future. And the Babylonians built more than 50 temples devoted to the god Marduk, including the ziggurat, a ladder linking heaven and earth. So the first writing system was developed. Here's the Temple of Marduk, quite impressive. And the first writing system was developed. They would use styluses to mark clay tablets. And when the clay hardened, they became permanent records, preserving history for the first time. So people were in permanent villages. They were planting their own food. They were keeping domesticated animals. They had different orders of workers, and they had kings. So here's King Hammurabi, who established the first code of justice. The first code of justice. It was there that they had the idea of the presumption of innocence. In the code of justice, you are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So the emergence of cities in Mesopotamia in the 4th millennium BCE, that means in the 3000s BCE, it was made possible by the inventions of writing, advances in metallurgy, and so forth. And the urban revolution here in the ancient Near East, in Egypt, also in the Indus Valley, in China, Central and South America, increasingly they featured a divine king who was raised to a godlike eminence above the rest of society. And King Sargon was one of the main guys, conquered. He was the Assyrian king. So kingship became this new institution, and the whole nation's welfare was seen as bound up with the welfare of the king. So we Jungians think of the king as a symbol of the self, of wholeness, and the principle of royalty, the personality of kings and queens is a central theme in myths, along with death and rebirth and creation and destruction and animals and all kinds of other themes. Crazy families is a theme in myth, but kingship is a huge theme. So, and when we come to the Gilgamesh epic, if we get that far today, that's all about reflection on kingship. So the famous Jungian analyst John Weir Perry wrote, it was typical for a society to establish a powerful focal point where humans reached divinity and divinity entered man. And this was personified in the figure of the sacral king. Royal father was the center of the realm, endowed with a magical or numinous potency. The king mediated the life force, giving fertility, carrier of the power of authority, giving order, integrity, bearer of the aggressive might of the executive function, giving chastisement to disorder, encouragement to obedience. In the symbolic cosmos, the locus of the most extreme, supreme powerfulness was the axial center, and any figure occupying this position became highly numinous and evoked feelings of awe and reverence. For not only was this the focal point where the world's powers were concentrated, it was the connecting link between the three planes of existence, the sky world, the world of man, and the underworld. Ancient rituals established a metaphysical center, a world navel. The sacral kingship of archaic times was the expression of this dynamis of the center. This was the germinating center out of which the creation had burgeoned forth in the beginning. Beginning means the beginning of each yearly cycle. Creation was not a singular, unique event taking place at the start of all things, but was an annual ritual act of recreating the world. Where there is numen, there must be devices to keep it invigorated. So, in ancient Babylon, at the annual spring New Year's festival, the creation myth, the Enuma Elish, was recited by the high priest, and the hero Marduk's triumph over the forces of chaos was celebrated. Here he is triumphing over the forces of chaos, the dragon Tiamat. So the recitation served as a kind of incantation for controlling the flooding of the city resulting from the rising of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The ritual represented this inundation as an annual battle between Marduk and watery chaos, or Tiamat. The myth expresses the triumph of patriarchal kingship over the culture of the Great Mother, signified by Tiamat. And the present power of kings was believed to derive from Marduk's primordial world-ordering acts. So according to the creation myth, the Enuma Elish, before the creation of heaven and earth, nothing existed but water. Water existed in two forms: fresh water, called Apsu, and salt water, Tiamat. Tiamat was a dragon-like monster. So Apsu and Tiamat, sweet and salt water, mingle and produce 5 offspring, including the sky god Anu, the father of Ea, spelled E-A, and Ea is the father of Marduk. So the sweet and briny waters of life intermingle, where we learn lessons equally from pleasure and pain. Crucial events occur prior to the birth of Marduk. Apsu, goaded on by his attendant Mumu, was plotting to wipe out human beings, his children, who were apparently too noisy and unruly. They were disturbing their mother, Tiamat. But the dastardly plot was relayed to the gods, the sons of Tiamat and Apsu. And one of the sons, Ea, planned a countermove. He set a spell, and it stilled the waters. He poured sleep upon Apsu, so he was sleeping soundly, drenched with sleep. Ea unfastened Apsu's belt, took off his crown, took away his mantle of radiance, and put it on himself. He held Apsu down and slew him. Ea set up his triumphal cry over his foes. So Ea takes possession of his father Apsu's symbols of kingship, his crown, and thus he takes his power. Just as the Greek god Kronos deposes his father Uranos, Ea commits the primal act of patricide, seizes his father's crown, and crowns himself, an archetypal act of self-affirmation. The myth tells us that to individuate, to self-actualize, we first have to still the waters through inner work, through yoga and meditation. First, we still the waters, and then we pour sleep upon our critics and adversaries. Then we can claim our crown and its mantle of radiance, overcoming the Father's authority and our primal Oedipal fear of his reprisal. The myth informs us, it's going to inform us that individuation involves emotional differentiation from both parents and acts of self-coronation, putting the crown on our own head. Otto Rank called this the act of self-appointment. Now, the child of Ea and his wife, Damkina, the child is Marduk, and Marduk is filled with awesomeness. He's filled with power and radiance. He has a piercing stare, an outstanding physique. He's a real hunk of a guy. And 5 fearsome rays were clustered above him. So this was a very impressive and magnetic individual. It reminds me of our instinct to pay homage to those admired star personalities who wear the radiant crown with poise and confidence. That's why we watch the Academy Awards and the Emmys, royal coronations, the inauguration of presidents, the World Series, and the NBA Finals. We get a charge out of watching a deserving person's public crowning. And we see in radiant celebrities and triumphant champions, we see a reflection of our own possibilities. And they inspire us to strive in our own small ways to become awesome individuals. I know I'm sounding a little dramatic here, but a person with a defined calling at different stages of life is on fire with purpose and rises every day to spare no effort, ready to spare no effort on behalf of our science, our poetry, our garden, our child, our music, our business enterprise. That's what it means to be filled with radiance, to be cloaked in rays of glory like Marduk. Now, the gods were threatened by Marduk. They thought, who is this guy? They beseeched Tiamat, who was the mother of them all, to vanquish Marduk and avenge the death of Apsu. So Tiamat conjured an army of monsters and dragons to oppose Marduk. The text reads, they were working up to war, growling and rages. She bore giant snakes, sharp of tooth and unsparing of fang. She filled their bodies with venom. She cloaked ferocious dragons. She stationed a horned serpent, a Mashushu dragon, a rabid dog, aggressive Umu demons, and a bull man bearing merciless weapons. Her orders were so powerful they could not be disobeyed. So we've got a horrible army of monsters arrayed against the hero. Learning of Tiamat's plans, Ea counseled his son Marduk, preparing to send him into battle with these assembled monsters. He proceeded with Ea's blessing. And also his grandfather, Anshar, convened a council of the gods. He asked them to decree a destiny for Marduk, their champion. This is in contrast to Apsu's oppression of his children. Here, the father's influence is very supportive. They're getting Marduk ready. Marduk was honored. They had a voracious banquet where large quantities of grog were consumed. And then they honored Marduk as having an unequal destiny. They said, because he is the one who came forward. He wanted of his own free will to confront Tiamat. The hero or heroine is someone who steps forward, who rises to meet a daunting challenge. By stepping forward, by making a valiant effort, we decree our own destiny. So it's our first task, gathering the courage to step forward. For one of us, stepping forward might mean applying to law school, or deciding to run for public office, or approaching a bank for a business loan, or giving a poetry reading, or having one's volume of poetry published. We dare to step forward encounter the menacing monsters that represent our fears, and we try to subdue them. So, to state the obvious, the mythical heroes struggle with the great mother dragon. It's a symbol of separation, individuation as a key developmental process, the symbol of differentiation of ego identity, and also, as Jung showed 100 years ago, it is a symbol of renewal through encountering the power of the unconscious. You don't want to be swallowed by the monster or vanquished by it, but you have to encounter it. That's the basis of, a basic image for Jung's idea of the confrontation between the ego and the unconscious. So it's an old symbolism in depth psychology. You could also say Marduk's battle with Tiamat signifies a negative mother complex, a fear mother will thwart our individuation, that she'll punish us for leaving her symbiotic orbit, for disobeying and threatening her sovereignty. So many of you have heard of Margaret Mahler, her work on separation, individuation. She described this as the rapprochement phase of early childhood. So basically, each person has to go to battle with various dragons and monsters when striving to unfold ourselves in the face of obstacles and adversities, doubters and naysayers, or when we're threatened by the fangs of self-doubt. We have to vanquish the relentless attacks of merciless inner demons. And that's a fact. So, to make a very long story short, Marduk vanquished the retinue of monsters and confronted the screaming, raging Tiamat. He harpooned her and did her in. He established cult centers for worships of the gods, and he set up constellations corresponding to the gods. He designated the year and marked out its divisions, apportioned 3 stars each to the 12 months. He made the crescent moon appear and designated it the jewel of night to mark out the days. And he go forth every month without fail in a corona at the beginning of the month to glow over the land. He goes on, he's talking to the moon and basically saying the 15th day shall always be the midpoint, the half of each month. Gradually shed your visibility and begin to wane. Marduk demarcated cosmic order in alignment with phases of the moon. So he was an astrologer. He discovered the periodicity of life, the cyclical nature of time, whose phases repeat without fail. He taught the wisdom of allowing energy to wane at the close of cycles, trusting that in time, the crescent moon will reappear. He created mountains. He opened up gushing springs. He created the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. He did all this. And he established the city of Babylon, the gateway of the gods. So he created an ordered cosmos. His triumph over the forces of chaos was recounted at the annual New Year's festival at the Ishtar Gate. Where's the Ishtar Gate? Here it is. This is where they did the procession every year at this tremendous gate. And it was the ongoing role of the present king to maintain the ordered social world first established by Marduk. So Mircea Eliade goes on to explain the connection between the ritual coronation of kings and New Year's rites. And he explains how In Fiji, the king's enthronement ceremony is called creation of the world. So when a new king comes to power, the cosmogony, the creation myth, was repeated. It was said that the coming to power of a king was like the return to the creation. In India, the installation of the king, the Rajasuya, included rituals to recreate the universe. And in this ritual, the king raises his arms. He is symbolically raising the axis mundi, and anointed, he stands on the throne, lifting his arms. So he is incarnating the cosmic axis fixed in the navel of the earth and touching the heavens. And in ancient times, this ceremony was repeated every year to regenerate the cosmos. So, as you all know, the Queen of England recently died. And in the United Kingdom, they're about to go through a coronation. And most of us who aren't British subjects, we don't follow this king. But the mythical coronation is about to happen in a few months. I believe it is subtly resonating in our collective unconscious. In other words, it's a world event. Here in America, we're going through a national crisis because a man presumes he should be treated like a king and persists in disputing a fair election, deciding who has the legitimate power of leadership. I find it meaningful how often myths describe power struggles and skullduggery in the assertion and assumption of social leadership. You know, we saw that with Seth overthrowing Osiris and taking over power. And then Osiris' son Horus has to plead his case to the gods that he should take the throne. So myths inform us in no uncertain terms about the challenges of achieving autonomy and self-governance, or what people go through to get to the place where they can decisively lift their arms, raise their axis mundi, and receive the mana and grace of the spirit. I'm just pausing to notice how long I'm going on, but I am not at I'm not to my resting point yet. So I'm hoping you will stay with me as I develop this theme. The Mahabharata of India. Here's the enthronement of the king in ancient India. The Mahabharata of India, 74,000 verses, recounts the struggle for royal power after the untimely death of King Pandu and the destiny of Pandu's 5 sons, who are known as the Pandava brothers. This rough picture shows you King Pandu on the left has 5 sons. Now, when Pandu dies young, his second wife, Madri, ascends his funeral pyre, as was the unfortunate custom. And so his sons, the Pandavas, are now orphans, and they must go to live at the court of their uncle, Dhritarashtra, alongside their cousins, the Kauravas, which is Dhritarashtra's 100 sons. The Kauravas are all asuras. They are demonic and cannibalistic beings, really a pleasant bunch. So the Pandavas must now grow up, basically go to high school with this gang of hooligans, their cousins. And chief among the cousins is Duryodhana. Now, when Pandu dies, his blind older brother Dhritarashtra becomes the the regent, the temporary ruler. But he decides he isn't suitable for the throne because he's blind. So he prepares to name Pandu's eldest son, Yudhishthira, heir to the throne. And this stirs the envy of the ambitious, conniving Duryodhana, who conspires with his uncle Sakuni and several other siblings to disrupt Yudhishthira's coronation and to seize power. They want to take the throne over. So Dhritarashtra, first he's going to try and support the rise of his nephew Yudhishthira, but he soon defers to the ambitions of his son Duryodhana and allows him to hatch an evil conspiracy to undermine Yudhishthira. Now, Yudhishthira is a rather sensitive young dude. He'd rather retreat to the forest to practice yoga than to assume the reins of power. Some of his other brothers, his second brother Bhima, he's into power, but Yudhishthira, he doesn't really want the power. But he's next in line to the throne after his father's death. He's known as Dharma Raja, the king of Dharma, or the Dharma king. And he wins the affection of everyone. Everybody thinks he's an okay guy. So Dhritarashtra says, you're the crown prince, you're next in line. He has a legitimate claim to the throne as the eldest son of Pandu. But the ambitious cousin Duryodhana has an insatiable appetite for power. He's unscrupulous and power hungry. He is constantly plotting and scheming. And I'd like everyone to think, who is the unscrupulous person in your life that is always plotting and scheming something? So Yudhishthira is going to celebrate his coronation with this solemn enthronement rite, the Rajasuya, consecration of the king. And my theory is, we must all prepare our own coronation, our own consecration. But anyway, Yudhishthira is at the moment of splendor. He's about to take the throne, and Duryodhana's jealousy is at its peak. So to obtain through deceit what he could not get through any other means, Duryodhana plots with his uncle. They organize a dice game at Dhritarashtra's court in which Yudhishthira must play against Uncle Sakuni, playing on behalf of Duryodhana. This Rajasuya included a dice game. That was part of the ceremony, a dice game. So now Yudhishthira has to play against his uncle. Yudhishthira is inexperienced. Sakuni is a clever and dishonest player. He's sure to win. The game is rigged. So during the first round, the Dharma Raja loses all his possessions. He loses everything. He loses his kingdom. He loses his freedom. He loses his brother's freedom, and also the freedom of his wife, Draupadi, who, by the way, is married to all 5 Pandava brothers. It's a complicated family situation. I'm just going to leave it at that for today. So here, the person undergoing the coronation is upended. The Kauravas prey on his innocence and inexperience. The ways of power in the world are ruthless. Many of us pass through times when our vulnerabilities are exposed. We deeply feel that vulnerability. Sometimes we face defeats of the ego, like Yudhishthira, or we're drawn into conflicts we didn't choose. But in the end, Yudhishthira is one of the last people left standing. Now, in our present world, Donald Trump is a scheming scoundrel who tries to cheat his way to victory, who may be about to lose his kingdom in his lifelong game of dice. That's the last thing I'm going to say about Trump for at least the next half an hour. But anyway, another game of dice is organized, and now the stakes are either victory or a 12-year exile in the forest, followed by an additional year during which the Pandava brothers will have to live completely incognito. And many of us experience these times where we're hidden, living in, a state of where we're totally incognito. So they play a second round. Sakuni wins again. Big surprise. Duryodhana takes power, begins his reign. The Pandavas flee into exile. They go into this period of clandestine life. And eventually a great war breaks out. And nearly everyone perishes. Duryodhana perishes on the battlefield. And Yudhishthira survives and performs the ritual sacrifice that affirms his kingship. He's joined by his brothers. Uncle Dhritarashtra is there. Order is restored. And it is during this war between the cousins that the avatar Krishna teaches Arjuna, the third Pandava brother, the doctrine of the Bhagavad Gita, the text that describes the struggle for self-mastery, the war within, the struggle for self-mastery every person must wage if he or she is to emerge victorious from life. The great Indian philosopher Eknath Easwaran wrote, Mahatma Gandhi encapsulated the Gita's message in one phrase: Nishkama karma, selfless action. Work free from selfish motives. Work without selfish desire. I'm not going to read the whole quote because we need to hasten through this. But basically, Krishna tells Arjuna, renounce the fruits of action, meaning attachment to the outcome. Give up attachment to the results of what you do. Give your best to every undertaking without insisting everything work out the way you intended. The Gita says, perform work without selfish attachments, alike in success and defeat. Yoga is evenness of mind. India's other great epic, the Ramayana, also describes a struggle over the transfer of royal power after a king's death. But here the protagonist, Ram, exemplifies the exercise of power without selfish desire. Here, an aged king, Dasharatha, wants his son Ram to take the throne, to succeed him. Ram is another guy like JFK. He earns the affection and admiration of everyone. Everybody loves him. Dasharatha says, you'll be the crown prince. Everyone agrees, except one of the king's three wives, Queen Kekiya. She wants the kingship for her own son, Bharata. It seems that Kekeyi had done some favor, had helped save King Dhritarashtra's life. So he owes her some favors. She has some leverage. I think maybe she has a prenup agreement. So he has to do whatever she asks when she wants to cash in these favors. She demands that her son, Bharata, become the crown prince. And she demands that Ram be sent into exile for 14 years, banished. She believes that in 14 years, the people will have forgotten him and her son, Bharata, will rule. And that'll be great. So Dasharatha, he's forced to yield to her wishes. He can't go back on his word. He has no choice. So the day when Ram was supposed to be consecrated turns into the day of his departure for exile. Can you imagine this scenario in the royal family of Britain? Can you imagine if Camilla, the queen consort, if she had a son, and if she said to King Charles, when you've come to the end of your days, I don't want Prince William to become the king. I want my son to be the king, and I want you to send William into exile for 12 years. Can you imagine the uproar that would cause? Talk about uncomfortable family situations. Ram accepts the news with stoic equanimity and promptly heads to the forest. Disinterested and virtuous, he submits with joy, seeking above all else to help his father keep his word. His wife Sita refuses to stay behind, and she goes into exile with her husband. They go, and the king dies of a broken heart. So Bharata is summoned to be consecrated as king, but he gets word of his mother's scheming right around the time that he learns that his dad has passed away. So he refuses to rule in place of Ram. He considers Ram the rightful heir. So he goes off to the forest in search of Ram to tell him of their father's death and to tell him, come on back to Ayodhya, you should rule. You should assume the throne. But Ram believes his father's death doesn't invalidate his promise. He chooses to complete his 14 years of exile. He will honor his banishment. So he tries to use his time usefully. So he goes into battle against demons. There's lots of demons. So he's trying to vanquish the demons, and he subdues lots and lots of them. So in revenge, the chief demon, his name is Ravana, he's a terrible demon. He abducts beautiful Sita and holds her captive on the island of Lanka. Ram, in his quest to recover Sita, he receives much aid from Hanuman, who is the monkey king, who represents the power of being in service of our world in whatever way we can. Hanuman signifies opening the heart chakra, and he reminds us that with love, miracles are possible. So Ram receives some divine assistance. Vishnu gifts him with the Brahma arrow, the arrow of Brahma. And Ram uses this arrow to slay Ravana, and they liberate Sita. So he's reunited with Sita, but at first, this couple has some issues to work out because she spent a year on the island of Lanka, and Ram is suspicious she might have hooked up with the demon during that year. So he's not sure he can trust her. And she insists, dude, nothing happened. I was totally faithful to you. I kept Ravana at bay. And to prove her innocence, she does what's called the fire ordeal. She jumps into a fire. She says, if I'm lying, may I be burned up. If I'm telling the truth, I'll be okay. So she throws herself into the fire and emerges unscathed. Not a single hair is singed. And so now Ram is humbled. He realizes he's been an idiot for doubting her. King Dasharatha appears from his heavenly abode, and he asks Sita to forgive Ram. She says he was just doing it to uphold appearances of, the Dharma, like, it wouldn't be proper to accept you back right away, or some such thing. So he asks Sita to forgive him, and Ram offers a blessing to his stepmother, Kiki, the one who had sent him into exile. So he is releasing his resentment towards her. If myths describe crazy families, here there's a beautiful outcome, as everyone is trying to forgive each other. That doesn't happen every day. And by now, Ram's exile has come to an end. And they all return to the capital where Ram is jubilantly welcomed. The joy that had been cut short 14 years earlier is restored in full measure. Ram's coronation occurs. And together with his brother, Bharata, he ushers in a golden age and rules for over 10,000 years. Wow. So I love this about Ram. He gets demoted. He gets exiled. He gets sent down to the minor leagues. He's like the San Francisco 49er quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, who gracefully accepts being replaced by the young guy, Trey Lance. Interesting name. And in his humility is his victory. He takes the challenge in stride, never complains about the insult of it all. He doesn't get into a snit. And now he's the starter again. But anyway, Ram's exile is the time of latency and waiting, a trial faced with equanimity and composure and self-offering in service. That can be an inspiration to all of us. He's the same in success or defeat. Ram uses the Brahma arrow gifted him by Vishnu. So too we direct our God-given powers to the fight against the powers of hatred, coercion, and domination, symbolized by Ravana. We direct our arrows with pure intention. We call in the divine assistance we need to carry out our humble missions. And I love that Ram and his brother are not rivals, that they're able to reach a power-sharing agreement. So Ram is the avatar of virtuous leadership in accordance with Dharma, with integrity. Those who emulate Ram strive to be the culture heroes our world needs, working for Dharma in our small, mostly unseen ways. So why am I going into all this? I mean, you've been listening for 2 hours. I'm thankful for that. We have so much pain about bad leaders right now. We have some terrible leaders. We have Putin. We have North Korean President Kim. We've had Trump. We have Erdogan in Turkey, Duterte and the Marcos family in the Philippines, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, President Xi of China. We have some tyrannical rulers in our midst. So we are troubled, we're disheartened by false and terrible leaders. We hope for the fall, the downfall of horrible leaders. By returning to mythologies of kingship, I want to invoke the dynamis of the center, to use John Weir Perry's term, to inspire us to greater self-determination and sovereignty and commitment to upholding an ordered and decent world. So in our era of democracy, it's each person's task to claim our throne, stand in our innate dignity with noble bearing and self-respect, believing that our actions and works have potency. The story of Ram reminds us we can act with conviction from our solar plexus power center, but also come from the heart center with the feeling of love and concern for our world. So as sun kings and sun queens, may we each hold the power of the center from which our energies and intentions extend and spread, so we renew the world and keep its numen fully invigorated. Now, I've gone on much longer than I expected for this first part, and it is possible that we won't do part 2 today because I think I may be pressing your patience to its limits. But what I would like to do is have you all take a 10-minute break to contemplate the stories that you've heard, whatever it brings up for you, whatever it reminds you of. Take a moment to write a few words or make a picture. And the story of Gilgamesh is a story of a horrible tyrant, a horrible person in power who goes through a transformation. But what I will do is after we take our 10-minute break, we can decide whether to just discuss what we've covered so far or whether to go onward. So I thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in 10 minutes. I'm going to have some music playing in the background, but feel free to turn off your camera or whatever you'd like, and I'll see you in 10 minutes, and we'll discuss. And I'll see you in 10 minutes. And so hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome back, folks. Well, I think what we should do is just have discussion at this point. I think I've said more than enough. And what I'm most interested in is your declarations, comments and declarations. And I invite your response to the material we've explored today. And I think the best way is to raise your hand. There's a little place on the screen to.
I see Elaine has her hand up.
Yes, Elaine.
Yeah. Okay. You have given us a message of hope by exploring these myths with us, and I'm sure I'm not alone in being in despair about what can I do as an individual in face of all of the threats we're facing, whether it's the threats to our democracy, global warming, the loss of human rights. And you have inspired in me the fact that if I can hold on, if we can all hold on to fair play and righteousness, and that we can keep the light on, there's hope. And thank you for that.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. I love what you said.
Greg, I have one comment. Since we're not doing Gilgamesh, one of the things that Gilgamesh has to learn is that he's mortal and he's going to die like everybody else. And he has to go to the ends of the earth to figure that out. And in a way, Inanna has the same discovery. She has to essentially die to come back. So in a way, it's you talked about the creation of this archetype of kingship, where there's this divine fertility and in this masculine figure of a king. This is, in a way, it's the undoing of that, the humanizing of the king. When Gilgamesh realizes that, like his friend Enkidu, he's going to die, that's when he becomes human again. And in a way, the same thing happens to Achilles in the Trojan Wars, where he essentially comes to he stops dragging. He sees Priam as like a stand-in for his own father and stops dragging Hector around the city and becomes, he reconciles with something human beyond the archetype. That's just my own take on what I've been taking in. So I thank you very much. This has just been a brilliant presentation. Thank you.
Oh, Stephen, thanks so much. Alan, I think you had your hand up.
Oh yeah, I was typing the question. I guess I'll ask. How do you? Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I just had a question about learning about the myths and cosmology of a tribe or a subgroup that is little researched. How would you go about learning things such as their myths and cosmology? Thank you.
You know, I think reading books, looking at pictures, and thinking about it as it evokes in us like a dream, you know, just feelings, relief, despair, rage, whatever it evokes. But reading, you know, there's just, it's an infinite world. I'm a dilettante. I've only been looking into this a short time, and there's just an awful lot to learn, and it's just all fascinating. But I mean, I would start with one of the anthologies of world myth and trying to get a sense of the range of different stories, different cultures tell. Is that helpful, Alan?
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, sure. David, you have a comment?
You know, a question actually. Well, yeah, I just agree. What a wonderful presentation. But the question that I haven't had throughout was about myths relating to mankind as the crown of creation. I don't know whether you touched on that or not, or whether it was just in the back of my mind, but specifically that man as the crown of creation.
No, that wasn't one of the things that I touched on. In fact, more to the point was Hesiod saying, yeah, we've actually fallen from a more evolved state to our current ways of being. But David, was there a specific?
Well, if we're fallen, from where have we fallen? Perhaps that's a link between where we are and where we were, if we were at a higher state. Yeah, are there myths about that somewhere? And
I don't honestly know the answer. You know, your question about the myths of humans as the crown of creation.
But I'm just wondering, is that not a universal belief among humanity historically and at the present time? Isn't that a significant belief?
David, I don't honestly know the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
What a wonderful presentation. I got so much out of it.
Thank you, David. Hi, Len.
Hi. That was an epic, really an epic presentation. It was quite amazing. And it's interesting, you know, how you talked in all of these myths. There's the death and the different things. And right before you began, I had a call from a cousin and her son died. So it was a mother grieving for her son. And he had been ill for a long time. And so this is a little bit in response to what Elaine had brought up at the beginning when she spoke about what can we do. And I found that in responding to my cousin, what came up were just simple things like kindness, like be kind to yourself, and feel the presence of your son in your heart. And you could translate that into a lot of the myths that you spoke about, taking what you can be in touch with, which is your own human dignity, your own heart, your own kindness, and be that in whatever way you can, and hold in your heart the people who you love, and then you're in life in a life reinforcing way. And I just was touched by what Elaine said, and since I had just come from this conversation, and I found myself having this kind of conversation with my cousin and feeling her sorrow, but then also just recognizing that we carry on by being in touch with those parts of ourselves.
Beautifully said, Len. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and thank you. So really, really amazing.
Thank you, Len. Hi, Maddie.
Hi.
What did these stories bring up for you?
Lots. First of all, thank you for your presentation. Enlightening and actually also entertaining, listening to these myths. Inanna's myth is particularly very deep for me as a woman and seeing that archetype. But I was wondering towards the end when you said that nowadays, today on Earth, we're having so many tyrannical leaders with all these myths of tyrants and kings. I was wondering if you have any suggestions on what's happening with the psychology of the times for this to be happening right now.
Just that I think it's always been this way. One of the things that I was going to say about the Gilgamesh story is about a terrible king, and he gets together with a buddy, becomes really close to this guy Enkidu, and they go on a rampage. They go on just a terrible series of conquests. They think they can rule the world. And I was thinking about Trump and Putin. I was thinking about how Trump and Putin, they secretly made an agreement to take over the world. And it's just like Enkidu and Gilgamesh marauding and thinking they were invincible and they were going to just take over everything. So do I have any insights on the psychology of the times? No, I just try and find that little glint of light and humor in the timelessness of what's happening. But we also have virtuous leaders. So my personal opinion is we have a relatively virtuous person as the president right now. And it's a nice contrast to the selfish, infantile person who inhabited that office previously. But I'm not going to editorialize any more than that. But thank you for the question. I don't have any broader insights about the psychology of the times. But I'm interested in what the Inanna myth brought up for you as a woman. And if any other women want to speak to that as well.
Being willing to go deeper into the realms of darkness and the shadows. And as you go through that, you strip off layers and layers and layers of defenses, and
That's it.
Almost like the chakras, right? As you strip yourself of all of those skandhas, and as you rise up, then you rebuild a new identity, a new way of being on earth and in life. That's very dear to many, many of my clients and myself.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for reminding us with all these myths.
For those of you who don't know Mady Santos, she's a brilliant therapist and astrologer from Brazil. I'm so glad you could join us today.
This is Carolyn Grassi. I can't wave because I don't have my photo up there or whatever. Can I speak? Yeah,
Yes,
hi
please.
there. Yeah, I wanted to just mention what was particularly meaningful to me. I mean, the whole talk was wonderful, Greg. Thank you so much. Very wonderful. Joseph Campbell and the heroic journey, the getting lost and crashing in a way, not exactly his words. And then coming back to the community to share. I remember him saying that was the most difficult thing in some ways, because we have gained from suffering and collapse and observing rituals or participating. And then we long to share insights with our community. And he said that often is sometimes the most difficult, painful experience if one is not received. So I just am putting that out there. And I caution us not to project evil outside the self in one's group onto others, if you don't mind my saying that. Wars of the US have always been, quote, noble causes, okay? So Iraq was supposed to be wonderful, and you know what that was about, blah, blah. 20 years in Afghanistan, and now we're somewhere else. Well, we need to look at ourselves and not to project us as perfect and saving the world, etc. So I'm putting that out there. And in closing, I just want to say, Pope Francis, I think when he was asked on an airplane coming, I don't remember where he was coming from, but something critical they wanted the reporters to say about condemning homosexual life, gay people, whatever. And he said, who am I to judge? And I really like that. Who am I to judge? Implication, as if I and myself and my group are the enlightened ones and I'm going to condemn others. So humility and gratefulness. And so thank you for your talk, but I did want to mention, Jung and Freud caution us about projecting evil outside ourselves, outside our group, onto, so.
I think the point is to think about how can we be positive leaders, not necessarily in the political sphere, but just in our realms of activity.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I believe, I mean, I am, I don't want to say it's devotee, but I really admire Glenn Greenwald. And he and some others say something like dialoguing, discussing with those that don't agree with us, that are on the other side, we're liberal, we're progressive, I'm speaking for myself, and having friends or relatives that are more conservative, and being able to listen to where they're coming from. What have they suffered in their lives? Why do they feel this way? So I'm just saying, I think it's very positive to know that we are all on beautiful planet Earth together, and we can dialogue. We're not at such a great impasse. I don't think we are. It appears that way. Okay, a bow of thanks to you, Greg.
Oh,
Thank you
so
very much. Okay. I'll go back to muting.
My friend and editor, Nancy Carlton, is here. Nancy, did you have any comments or declarations, having heard some of this?
I'll be the one who says vote blue. Well, I mean, I do think all those things are both internal and external, and there are external forces that need to be stood up to. So I think we need those kind of heroes around too. So
Thank you, Nancy.
thanks for the very interesting talk.
Thank you, Nancy. Ancient Babylonian civilization focused a sharp lens on the dangers of an empowered royal ego running completely amok and becoming a destructive force. And this is seen in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known written story, a tale told by early inhabitants of the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Approximately 4,000 years old, the story was written down first around 2100 BCE, preserved on a number of clay tablets. Some of the themes of the myth include the opposition between nature and culture, wildness and civilization, knowledge that a hero develops through both successes and failures, fear of death, and despair at the realization we don't live forever. The story goes back to a time when myth and history are difficult to separate. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was apparently a historical figure. He was described as he who found out all things, who experienced everything, who went through all sorts of suffering. He was a warlord of great stature. But Gilgamesh's reign was not a happy one. He bullied and abused his people. People in the kingdom were upset and dejected. He wouldn't leave people alone. His behavior was overbearing. He will not leave young girls alone, the daughters of warriors, the brides of young men. Anu, father of the gods, heard their complaints, the voices saying, "Did the goddess of the earth create such a rampant wild bull? Now create someone to match the ardor of his energies. Let them be regular rivals and let Uruk be allowed peace." So they're petitioning the gods, make him a companion, someone to occupy him, so we can all be left in peace. So Ururu, goddess of creation, petitioned the lords to create a male playmate, a bro, a buddy, to occupy Gilgamesh because his out-of-control libido and his sense of royal entitlement caused him to prey on the young wives of other men, his subjects. So to keep Gilgamesh occupied, Ururu created a primitive man, Enkidu, who knew neither people nor country. He was dressed as cattle are. He lived among animals. He pulled out hunting traps and filled in pits dug by hunters to undermine their efforts. He kept letting cattle loose into the wild country. He drank at the watering hole next to the animals. Enkidu was created from animals and he was at home among animals. So you could say he was an animal man. Similar to the Indian figure of Prajapati, Pashupati, Lord of the animals. This is from the Indus Valley civilization, from Harappa. It's a terracotta seal, and it shows this animal person. So before he could be introduced to King Gilgamesh, Enkidu had to be cleaned up and civilized. So the goddess sent a courtesan, a temple prostitute, to turn Enkidu into a presentable man, because at this point, he was like an animal. So this priestess from the temple of love goes to Enkidu and makes love with him for 6 days and 7 nights. She molds him into a man. She makes him take a bath. She puts fragrant ointments on him. She arouses Enkidu and awakens him into human consciousness. But now that he's bathed and he has some deodorant on, the animals avoid him because he doesn't smell right. He can't run as fast as before. And they recognize Enkidu is no longer one of us. So now the courtesan invites Enkidu to return with her to the city of Uruk. And she describes this fantastic kingdom and this powerful king who is strong and like a wild bull. And she tells him all about Gilgamesh. Enkidu hears the reports of Gilgamesh's unacceptable behavior, exerting his right as king to sleep with a bride on her wedding night before her husband is allowed. And hearing this, Enkidu is offended. He thinks this is horrible. He wants to challenge Gilgamesh. He says, I'm going to confront Gilgamesh and demand that he changes. Everybody is complaining about the king, and Enkidu, this big hulk of a guy, wants to meet this bullying king and beat the crap out of him. That's his attitude. It's a big hulk. And it's similar to the behavior of higher primates, such as chimpanzees, who seek the physical domination of others to prove their alpha status. This is a form of masculine consciousness, trying to create that alpha role. So when the two guys meet, they wrestle mightily in the streets, making the walls tremble. Buildings are shaking, pillars are knocked over. The whole city is rumbling with the sounds of this fight. And Gilgamesh has been unconsciously looking for someone to match him, a worthy rival. So they have this huge fight. They destroy part of the city. They beat the heck out of each other. They're all bloodied. And then they embrace and become best buddies. They become bros. They bond. They become inseparable friends. So they go places together. They hold hands. Oh, here's the fight. And here they are, bros. They sleep together. They pursue various challenges. Now, it's unclear whether the two men are lovers or just very close friends. That's left up to our imagination. But either way, it is striking to read the story of men showing each other love rather than trying to destroy each other. So many of us encounter competitors and rivals who are trying to advance their goals and win victories. But it is possible to stop fighting each other and become allies. We're stronger when we form alliances and supportive colleagues with shared aspirations. So Gilgamesh and Enkidu decide to go to the forest together to fight the dragon Humbaba. Here's Humbaba, who guards the pine forest. And they are strongly advised not to go, as Humbaba is a mighty foe. He can hear things from a great distance. His utterance is fire. His breath is death. No one can face him. If he breathes on you, you're done for. So they travel a great distance. And Enkidu questions what they're doing because he realizes they're usurping the god's powers. They're acting in a way that is arrogant, full of hubris. They feel they're invincible. But this dragon was placed there by the goddess to guard the pine forest. So they're going against nature. And they have dreams before they encounter the dragon. They wake up one morning and they're telling each other their dreams. They seem to be warnings. Gilgamesh has an upsetting dream, and Enkidu explains that it means they will slay Humbaba, the monster, the keeper of the pine forest. But Enkidu has trepidation. He's not sure they should do it. But they strategize how they're going to take down the dragon. And the dragon taunts them and says, "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't challenge me." He threatens to bite their necks. "I'll bite your neck. Bite your neck." But Enkidu and Gilgamesh manage to take the dragon down. They subdue it. It's like the timeless story of the hero facing off with a monster, just like from the cave in Lascaux. It's the monster. It's the timeless theme of the hero and the monster. But now there's some twists. The dragon begs them to spare his life, but they refuse to show the dragon mercy, and they slay him. And now Enlil, the god who put Humbaba in place to protect the forest, is enraged. It's a cautionary tale that those of us pursuing our paths, we can leave a wake of destruction if we're too one-pointed, too obsessed with our objectives, and if we neglect to attend to those around us, or if we refuse to show them any mercy. So after this terrible deed, they go and they're washing their hair and their clothes. And now the goddess, now she's called Ishtar. Inanna and Ishtar are basically the same. They were regional goddesses and they got merged together. So she's now called Ishtar. And she, oh, here they are on their rampage. And she offers herself to Gilgamesh. She propositions him. She says, "I'll make you my divine consort." Apparently, at this point, Gilgamesh is only 2/3 a god. So instead, Gilgamesh curses the goddess. He rejects her. He notes that her previous husband and boyfriends like Dumuzi have all been discarded or killed or turned into wolves or pigs or frogs. So he basically says, "Why would I want to hook up with you? Because I see what you do to men." So here we see the first mythologium in history to describe men's fear of intimacy and the power of women. Furious, Ishtar tells her dad, her father, the sky god Anu, that Gilgamesh has shamed her. He's dishonored her. So she says to Anu, "Give me the bull of heaven to strike Gilgamesh down." Here she is. And so in the Sumerian tradition, the bull of heaven is the husband of Ereshkigal, the goddess of death, and the sister of Inanna, of Ishtar. So the bull of heaven is Ishtar's brother-in-law, in effect. She complains to the higher gods, "These men have cursed me, so we've got to eliminate them. We've got to take them down. And surely," she says, "they'll never defeat the bull of heaven." Meanwhile, Enkidu expresses doubts to Gilgamesh. He's still feeling uneasy about their killing the dragon Humbaba. He's got a lot of doubt. We see in Enkidu a growing sense of guilt and remorse about their frenzy of conquest and the destruction it causes. Victory at the expense of others is troubling to a reflective person. But the men continue their rampage of world conquest, and they succeed in killing the bull of heaven, sacred to the goddess, sent from heaven to defeat them. Killing the bull is the ultimate insult to Ishtar, and enraged, she curses Gilgamesh. So Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they go and wash the blood off their hands, and they go riding in a celebratory parade through the streets of Uruk. They're giving high fives to the assembled crowd. They're savoring their victory. They're just feeling just invincible. And Gilgamesh allows his retainers to praise him as the finest and proudest among men. I'm reminded of Trump having his cabinet members sit around the table and praise him. So Gilgamesh allows his retainers to praise him. Then he and Enkidu lie down in bed for the night. And Enkidu tells Gilgamesh, maybe we made a mistake. He expresses doubts about what they've done. Gilgamesh says, it's okay. Together, nothing can stop us. We're as close to being eternal as it gets. We don't need the gods. And it is with this statement that they cross a line into an unsettling level of hubris, arrogance, inflation, a dangerous feeling of indomitability. We might believe we can conquer the world, but it's best not to be overconfident because it seems to invite a reckoning with the gods, the transcendent forces that we haven't properly propitiated. Well, things do not go better for our heroes after this point. Here they are slaying the bull of heaven. The next morning, Enkidu says that he had an unsettling dream. In the dream, Anu, the father of the gods, said, because they have slain the bull of heaven and the dragon Humbaba who guarded the pine forest, one of them must die. Enkidu says to Gilgamesh, I'm dying, man. I shall sit among the dead. Never again shall I see my dear brother with mine own eyes. Enkidu starts going through agonies, and he's regretting his actions against the goddess. He weeps, sick at heart. He tells Gilgamesh another dream, disturbing dream, a vision of death. It's a vision of the dark house where everyone is deprived of light. Those who enter cannot leave. Dust is their food. Crowns were heaped up of those who had once ruled. So the crowns of the dead kings are all piled up there in the house of death. Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, is standing there holding a tablet that suggests a record of the life, sort of a book of days recording our actions. And from the time Enkidu had this dream, his strength was finished. He lay in bed sick for 12 days, and then he expired. Remember, we said a lot of myth is about death, trying to make sense of it. So now the story enters a new phase. Gilgamesh is consumed by grief when Enkidu dies. The dream of the pile of crowns of expired kings was disturbing, and Gilgamesh is letting that message sink in. It's a wake-up call that his earthly power, his indomitability, they are fleeting and time-limited. So he grieves and remembers all the great times he had with Enkidu, all their adventures. And he gets everyone in Uruk to mourn. But now Gilgamesh starts to neglect his appearance. He stops bathing. He roams the countryside, clad only in a lion's skin, mourning bitterly. Life without his friend is not worth living. He appears to be decompensating. He's falling apart. He's returning to the state of a wild animal man like Enkidu. He's becoming feral. He decides to give up being a king. He wants to become immortal. He's consumed with this fantasy that he could overcome death and thereby revive Enkidu. He figures if he's immortal, he can go into the underworld and rescue Enkidu. The only way he can do that, though, is to become immortal. So now he realizes he needs to find a wise guide. He needs the wise old man. He needs the counsel of Utnapishtim, the one human who tasted the plant of immortality. He meets a scorpion man who says, "That's impossible. You'll never make it across the mountains. There's no light there." So along the path, we're all bound to meet naysayers, those who tell us our quest is impossible or ill-advised, who dissuade us from our adventures. They try and steer us toward a safer path. Gilgamesh is devastated by Enkidu's death. He persists in seeking help. Humility is starting to emerge as he realizes he needs to find someone wiser and more enlightened. We all need a guru sometimes. So now Gilgamesh meets an alewife. You could think of her as a bartender. Her name is Siduri. She sees him sitting there full of grief, clad only in a lion's skin. And she says, "Why are you so sad? You look so dejected. Your cheeks are wasting away. Your face is weathered. Why is it?" He says it's because Enkidu has died and he's on a quest to find the secret of immortality so he can rescue his friend from the underworld. So the barmaid says to him, "Why are you seeking immortality? That's ridiculous. You'll never find what you're seeking. Only the gods possess immortality. You should be enjoying your life. Find a wife, have some kids." But instead, Gilgamesh is roaming around like Enkidu in an animal skin, looking confused and unhappy. We see depicted here 4,000 years ago an image of a man experiencing an existential crisis and detaching from social roles in search of a redemptive spiritual transformation. He's going through a major depression, but he's seeking some regenerative transformation. The alewife gives him some sound practical advice, but it's the nature of heroic seeking to disregard pragmatism and to persist in pursuing what appears to be a fool's errand, an impossible venture. It's a hopeless enterprise. But that's what the hero does. You're not deterred. Now, the story is poignant for me because in 2011, my friend Chris Abajian died at age 54. Chris and I were buddies in college. We hung out in New York City after college. We played music together. We traveled across the country, yacked on the phone, exchanged snail mail letters across the country for decades. We attended each other's weddings. Chris went to Mexico for some cheap dental work, and the dentist botched one of the root canals. So he got an abscess in his cheek, and for months he was beset by facial swelling, dizziness, headaches, and head colds. After 3 or 4 months, he decided to go on a hike. He was a mountaineer, and he went into the Olympic Mountains in Washington. He lost his footing, fell from an embankment, hit his head, and died instantly. And while I have quite a few good brothers in my life, there's no one who can replace Chris. He was zany, effervescent, a hilarious person, a great musician, a brilliant computer programmer. He genuinely cared about people. And it's hard to reconcile myself to his absence. Nothing is the same now. And the only way I can restore his life is to offer a few words to try to capture his essence. So now, desperate and undeterred, Gilgamesh says to the alewife, "Where can I find Utnapishtim?" And she says, "Nobody has ever been able to cross the sea to find him. The crossing is treacherous. It's impossible. The waters are lethal. Really, dude, you should forget about it." But, she says, there is a boatman of Utnapishtim named Urshanabi. And if you can find that guy, he could possibly take you across the waters to meet Utnapishtim. So Gilgamesh finds the boatman. If you'll recall in the story of Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha, who becomes the Buddha, there's a pivotal role played by a boatman who ferries him across. So he finds the ferryman and tells him the story about Enkidu and how he's been weeping over him for 6 days and 7 nights. And he says, "Can you take me to see this Utnapishtim? I've heard he has knowledge of the plant of immortality." He's reputed to be the only immortal and the only one who could tell Gilgamesh where to find this plant of immortality. Utnapishtim has magical powers, so he's listening in. He listens to the saga. He says, death is inevitable. He says it's futile to seek immortality. You can't avoid death, he tells him. Because he himself is eternal, he's privy to the secret, but he isn't supposed to share it with anybody. Yeah, he's got knowledge, but I'm not supposed to tell. He tells Gilgamesh, it is possible to become immortal, but it's not really desirable. It's not really, you don't really want to do this, he says. But Gilgamesh will do anything to get his friend back. He believes that the way to get Enkidu back is to become immortal, so he'll have some power in the underworld. I guess he's like Inanna. He thinks he can go into the underworld and boss them around. So Gilgamesh then questions Utnapishtim. He says, hey, how did you join the assembly of the gods and attain eternal life? Wouldn't we all like to know? To make a long story short, Utnapishtim was the sole survivor of a catastrophic flood that was sent by the gods to punish humanity, similar to the biblical Noah, from which the story of Noah basically derives from this Mesopotamian story. So apparently, we're in the story within the story now. Long ago, on the banks of the Euphrates, the gods decided there should be a flood. But Ea, remember Ea? He's the one who stole the crown from his father, Apsu. Remember that guy? Ea, the god of wisdom, told Utnapishtim, a man of Shurupak, to dismantle his house and build a boat, leave possessions and put aboard the seeds of all living things. So with great effort, he built the boat. He prepared the launch. He loaded the boat with everything there was, all the silver and gold, all the seeds, all his kith and kin, cattle, wild beasts from the country. got them all on board, and he saw the storm coming. It was terrifying. It's like watching CNN, watching the hurricane coming in. The gods cowered, afraid of the impending destruction. And for 6 days and 7 nights, the winds blew. Flood and tempest overwhelmed the land, just like Florida. Then the sea became calm. The wind grew quiet. The flood held back. He saw land, and he saw the boat had come to rest on Mount Nimush. The warrior guard Elil was furious that one human and his clan had survived the destructive flood, because the idea was to wipe them out, wipe out humans. But now the god of wisdom, Ea, chastised Elil for causing this flood, arguing for more just treatment of humans by the gods. Yes, treat us humans right. So Elil came onto the boat, took Utnapishtim by the hand, led him up with his wife, touched their foreheads, and said, "Henceforth Utnapishtim and his woman shall be as we gods are." So Utnapishtim describes to Gilgamesh how he heard an inner voice, inner guidance that told him to prepare for a rough storm and to carry the seeds of living things, to weather the upheaval until he reached a new world. And that's what we're all trying to do, is just weather the upheaval to reach a new world. But anyway, that's how Utnapishtim achieved divine status, achieved immortality, by surviving an apocalypse in a state of full consciousness. And through Ea and Elil's bestowal of grace, again, the mysterious divine assistance that gets us through the apocalypse. It's part of the lesson. God knows how any of us survive the storms of life. Sometimes it does feel like something is looking out for us, trying to show us how to reach the other shore. Now, Utnapishtim, he tries to warn off Gilgamesh from trying to find the plant of immortality. And he tells him, even if he could find it and locate it, the plant is very hard to grasp onto. Now, Utnapishtim says to Gilgamesh, if he wants to find eternal life, he must not sleep for 6 days and 7 nights. Overcoming sleep is part of overcoming his nature as a mortal human. But Gilgamesh immediately falls asleep for 7 nights. And Utnapishtim mocks him to his wife. Look at the young man who wants eternal life, he says. Sleep breathes over him like a fog. So here's an archetypal situation. We fail miserably in our first task. It seems we're in no way up to the challenge presented to us as part of our initiation. And at this stage, an inner sense of failure and inadequacy can set us back or cause us to become resigned and defeated. What's admirable in Gilgamesh is that he persists. He won't give up or turn back from what he feels must be accomplished. He's desperate to break through in his enterprise. He will not be deterred by any obstacle. That's heroic in a way. So Utnapishtim's wife lobbies her husband to send this pathetic wretch back home. And they're both ready to write him off as a loser because he just fell asleep when he was supposed to stay awake. So they think he's a loser. But Gilgamesh pleads with them and says he fears death. Utnapishtim is telling the boatman, Urshanabi, to take Gilgamesh, have him bathe, put on some clean clothes, put on a robe, and return to his city and give up this mad quest. But now Utnapishtim's wife has a change of heart. She says, Gilgamesh came, weary, striving. What will you give him to take back to his country? So after trying to dissuade him from this quest, Utnapishtim now tries to help him and proceeds to give Gilgamesh some detailed information about the location of the plant of immortality. He says to look for a plant whose root is like camel thorn, which will spike his hands. He tells Gilgamesh if he can win that plant, he'll find rejuvenation. So Gilgamesh has Urshanabi take him to that place. He ties a stone to his leg and descends to the bottom of the ocean. Goes down, 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 down. And when he goes down there, he feels his finger pricked by a thorny plant in the depths of the ocean. And he takes a branch off that plant. And he comes to the surface, elated. He's excited. He's got the plant of immortality. He found it. But he decides to first administer a piece of it to an old man to see if it rejuvenates him and turns him into a youth. So he decides to test it out, on someone else before he ingests it. So full of these thoughts and full of his good fortune, Gilgamesh finds a pool of cool water. He decides to take a nice soak, gloat over his good fortune. And he puts the plant near him on the side of the pool. He closes his eyes for his bath. But while he's soaking, a snake smells the plant and carries it off, shedding its scaly skin. And now Gilgamesh weeps, knowing his quest has been futile and he'll never attain immortality. His mistake was not eating the plant right away, not leaping for it, but trying to be all cautious about it, trying to play it safe. He should have been bold and just ingested the plant, just gone for it. So now Gilgamesh tells Urshanabi, he says to the boatman, he tells her, you should come visit Uruk, my city, and inspect its foundations. Check out the buildings, its brick walls. It's like Trump with Trump Tower. Look at me. Look at what I've done. Look at these brick walls and testify to the unrivaled splendor of the city. He's so proud of this city, and he hopes it will be a lasting testament to his achievements as a king. And there the story ends. The first epic in the history of human civilization concludes and instructs us that the buildings, the metaphorical edifices we construct through our steady labors over a lifetime, these are the way to achieve a lasting legacy for the future, to find internal satisfaction, a sense of completion and wholeness, and full self-realization. It's the best consolation for our frail mortality. In this story, a man seeks guidance from an eternal sage who reveals truths that are supposed to remain secret. In other words, it's gnosis, implying the communication of sacred knowledge. The secret is that each person has to seek out their own plant of immortality. For me, yoga, music, astrology, and dream interpretation are sources of rejuvenation. The sage's guidance is paradoxical because on the one hand, he says, Go home, complete your grieving, learn to be satisfied with a simple and straightforward life. But he also drops enough hints that Gilgamesh is able to locate the plant and touch it for an instant. Having touched it for an instant, he's connected to it permanently. I'm reminded of when I intersected for 5 seconds with John Lennon, when he passed me in the lobby of 135 Central Park West on New Year's Eve, 1981. Oh, no, 1980. Sorry. He passed me for 5 seconds in the lobby of my parents' apartment building. It's a timeless moment for me. It will always exist as if it were in the present time. It's a timeless experience. So by touching the magic plant and holding it for a few moments, Gilgamesh has become somewhat immortal. Here we are talking about him thousands of years later. Gilgamesh is a character who lives out a transformation. He begins as a man who was selfish, boorish, violent, arrogant, and destructive, who is humbled through encounters with the shadow and with the goddess of creation. And he discovers the value of comradeship and intimacy. He receives unexpected guidance from his dreams, which state truths and stir emotional realizations. He experiences a devastating loss, complicated bereavement, and depression, and he turns to nature for healing and solace. He sheds the persona of being a king and doesn't need to assert his power anymore. He just wants some comfort and relief from loneliness. He goes on a fantastic quest. He has the darshan of an immortal being. He learns about the great flood that was the end of one world and that tested and purified the man and woman who answered the call and prepared their ship. Learning to live mythically in alignment with archetypes allows us to experience a form of timeless existence. In the end, the plant of immortality ends up in the grasp of the tricksterish snake, a symbol of the unconscious itself, and of the spiraling evolutionary Kundalini energy that unfolds within us. So the myth ends with this reminder of the power of regeneration that allows us to shed our old skins and be renewed. So that's the oldest story known to humanity. It's the first written story. It's the greatest story ever told. And I hope you've enjoyed hearing it. I thank you for your attention to Gilgamesh.
Man.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, dear Guillermo. It's great to see you.
Signing off, brother. Talk soon.
Do you have any thoughts, Guillermo, on the story?
Oh my God. I have to sit with it. It's just, there's so much there. I mean, it's so deep, so rich, so textured and layered. I mean, it really is a story of a journey of redemption, of insight, of transformation, and you know, it's just, I mean, it's interesting to me, for one thing, how he seeks out an ally, a brother, a companion, or someone, or actually someone that act to match him, and they get into this amazing battle. But the battle actually brings them closer. I think, to me, that's a really interesting thing, that you can actually get closer to someone through conflict that you can actually find a place where, wow, we really engaged each other. We really met each other. We tested each other at that level of competence and strength and power. And that to me is just, it's a really good lesson to me just about friendship, that sometimes friendship you need that conflict that then tests how strong your friendship is. And I've had that with friends where I wanted to completely disengage and stop the friendship, but we decide to go into it. And when we go into it, the anger, the shame, the fear, all that comes up, and that brought us closer. So I really appreciate that in the story. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks,
Yeah,
Carol.
yeah. I wanted to say that it would be good to read that again slowly together with different people, reading and taking it part by part and relating personally to each part. There's so much there that it's something that could be ongoing. If it being the first story ever told, that I think anyone, given the right moment, would be moved and helped by that. But with people together, perhaps other various people reading slowly and talking a little, part by part, just all of the
Well, David, I
implications.
invite you and everyone here to, you can tell the story to your friends, to your loved ones, and unfold the story
Yeah.
as I've tried to do. So thank you for the comment. Well, my dear friends, we've gone about 20 minutes past our time, and I think we all have a lot to think about, but I encourage you to take a few minutes while the story is fresh in your mind and just jot down whatever it evokes for you, whatever feelings, whatever insights, whatever reminders it gives you. And I would like to really thank the Analytical Psychology Club. I'd like to thank Stephen and Mallory and Carolyn, who have been so warm in inviting me to be here, and all of you who have spent your afternoon listening and participating. I thank you.